Hello, everybody, and welcome to the General Eclectic Podcast with Rod Dreher. I'm your host, Kale Zeldin, coming at you a little bit of a different time of day for both of us. Rod, it's really late for you. It's kind of late for me, but only late because I'm a real morning person, and it is sort of taxing me at the end of my day. But at any rate, I'm glad we got on. How are you doing? How's Budapest?
Man, I'm woe out. I tell you what, woe slap out, as our people say. Yeah, because I've just been doing a lot of work this week in
Yeah.
travel, and I'm leaving in the morning for Turkey. I'm going to
Oh,
spend a few days going to the seven churches of Revelation.
wow. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
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 I've offered this trip. It's something sponsored by the Turkish tourism agency, but I'm going as a spiritual pilgrim. So we'll
Cool.
see what there is to learn there. But it has also been a pretty exhausting last few days because of some
Yeah.
drama going on back home in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, I mean that's wild stuff here going on. I mean that you even had a connection to any of this is pretty bizarre. But what's been going on in this sort of this sphere of the world that we're sort of adjacent to, right?
Yeah. It's because for reasons we can get into, this is spreading out to the entire world of classical Christian education. Well, what happened was this. There is a small classical Christian school in Baton Rouge called Secular Classical Academy. My kids went to school there. None of my kids are there anymore. Two have graduated, and the other's finishing her last year at home.
Hmm.
But it's a great little school. It's been there for a decade. Tiny school, a wonderful place. The headmaster of the school, until just the other day, was a man named Thomas Achord. Thomas, I didn't know him well. He was, I barely knew him at all because he was a very quiet, modest, gentle soul. But it
Yeah.
turns out that he had been running, he had several Twitter accounts under
Uh-oh.
fake names.
Uh-oh.
And yeah, you know what's coming. Had several
Hmm.
Twitter accounts under fake names, and they were just horrible. This one in particular, under the name Tullius Adland, was really disgustingly racist, anti-Semitic, deeply misogynistic, just awful, awful stuff. And he got outed. And the reason it's important, it's not just a sad little story there, is
Hmm.
he's the podcast partner of a guy named Stephen Wolfe, a Protestant
Hmm.
man who has written a book
Oh yeah.
that's a lot of Protestants are talking about called The Case for Christian Nationalism.
Right.
Now, I didn't read the book. It's been mostly, from what I've been able to tell, a phenomenon in Protestant circles, but apparently it's
Hmm.
a book that's gotten a lot of attention. Um,
Sure.
and I don't know if there's anything racist about the book at all, but the point is simply this. Somebody found out that Thomas was doing this. He initially denied it was him, and then he later came out and said, okay, it was me. Well, he got fired by the school. Uh,
Okay.
and it has caused this huge controversy because, predictably, a lot of people who don't know anything about the school are like, see, school is a nest of white supremacy.
Right. Right. Right.
And isn't this just how it goes with classical Christian education? They say that they want to
Hmm.
defend the West, but in fact, as we can see, it's all about white supremacy. Well, look,
Sure.
this is it's slanderous nonsense. I know the school.
Right.
The school is run on a shoestring budget. People are like, well, how could the school not have known? Like, dude, we're very online people. There's no
Right.
way the people in this school could have known about this guy's Twitter account because,
Right.
and it's just, I'm so angry about it, Kale, because first of all, I'm angry that this guy did this and he put the school at
Right.
risk. He put all this dirt out there. And he even said in his Twitter account, he said, I'm deeply involved in the classical Christian education movement, which
Yeah.
he is. He's
I
got a
saw that tweet. Yeah. I saw that tweet.
national platform on some things because he's a really smart and talented guy. And he talked about how he wanted to use this involvement to sort of help white people wake up. Well,
Hmm.
thank God he was exposed and he's
Hmm.
not going to be in a position to influence young minds. Nevertheless, poor little Sequitur is in really bad shape now with being attacked from all sides for things they didn't do. And beyond that, it's not just a local story. Now there are critics of the classical Christian education movement who are like, you want to study the Greeks and the Romans? You want to study the medievals? It's all about white supremacy. In other words, they're taking the same vicious and stupid critique that that the woke have leveled against the classics itself as a discipline, and turning on this tiny little school. And it breaks my heart, but it also really pisses me off.
Yeah, I was struck, obviously that's painful. I know personally for you and your family, it's meant so much to you all. And I know you've regularly marveled at the kind of education that your kids were getting, and, reading the Odyssey and reading some of these great works that has become such a scarce reality in these institutions we still call schools. But what was frustrating to me is the sort of this painting in broad stripes, like, oh, well, see, this just proves that, dread Christian nationalism is really a cover for white supremacy and all that kind of stuff. And it's just, it's really pretty disgusting stuff, and really not true, right? I mean, I think that's the part that's so frustrating.
But I think that from what I've been told by from emails from others who aren't affiliated with Sequitur, but in this movement, that there is a small subgroup of these people, and they're all men, young men, who do believe this stuff, and they do think that recovering appreciation for our civilization and its treasures is part of racial consciousness. Here in Europe, where I live, there is some of this. They don't have anything called classical Christian education over here, at least not that I'm aware of. But I've seen in France, for example, there is a white supremacist organization. I forget the name of it, but they run schools to help people in France get in touch with the lost classics, et cetera, et cetera. But they have an explicit racial agenda there. And to think that, I mean, I guess I wouldn't have been that surprised to find out that there were people in the U.S. in the classical Christian movement who harbor these evil views. Man, I didn't think it was going to touch people I know and care for. And I got to say, Kale, this is so personal for me. My wife taught at Sequitur. She resigned as soon as she found out what Achord had done. She just said, "That's it, I'm out." And I don't know whether that was a good or a bad idea, but as you know, we're in the middle of a divorce right now, and we don't have a lot of incentive to say good things about each other. But I will say this: I saw her and her friends who were teachers there pour themselves out long hours, year in and year out, to build that school up out of a love for these kids and out of a love for classical Christian education. That's all it was. It was love
and real sacrifice, right? I mean, it was a real work of sacrifice. I mean, that's horrible, and that is really one of that's what I guess they call, unfortunately, collateral damage, for these sort of these larger spirits that I like to call or talk about them. But look, Rod, sort of telescoping back a second now, from the sort of the personal aspects of the personal hooks of the story for you. Look, you yourself have said over the course of our conversations these last, couple of years, that, we can't be surprised when the demons of white supremacy rise up as a consequence to all the kind of race consciousness that has been raised since 2020.
Yep. I've been saying on my blog over and over.
Over and over again, right? You've been talking about, look, guys, this is coming, and here it is. Little did you know that it would be, in your back door there. But my goodness,
I mean, there's no defense of Achord at all. I mean, he deserves everything that he's getting, but the left has been pushing for years, the woke left, anti-white racism in the strongest possible way. And And I've said that you're calling up the demons of white supremacy with this sort of thing. You cannot expect all white people in America to be like these mewling liberals on campus who are so full of hatred for themselves that they will accept any kind of racist BS to make them feel guilty. You can't just heap this stuff on people and make it mainstream in our culture without calling up an equal and opposite reaction from the radical right.
Rod, it's not surprising to me, you and I are, Gen Xers sort of through and through. You're sort of early Gen X, I'm mid Gen X. And I'm not, we grew up in the wake of a massive reorienting and restructuring of a genuinely racist culture. We both love where we come from, but we would both be absolutely remiss if we didn't point out the actual racism that was embedded in the structures of the world that we grew up in, and it was being thankfully untangled throughout our childhoods. And again, it's tough to, it's tough to see this happen because you and I both know how much actual progress on the sort of the bigotry front and the racism front that has occurred in our lifetimes. But so I think you and I are sort of part of this. We drank deeply from the sort of the mainstream MLK belief in the content of our character and all that stuff. And we, that's very much part of what formed us. And when we started to abandon that, about 10 years ago, I guess, maybe 15 years ago, and it got accelerated, of course, in 2020 in the wake of the Floyd business. I'm just not surprised that the younger people, who don't have the kind of long view that maybe you and I have as regards these movements, are just sort of looking around themselves and being like, well, if they're doing all this sort of stuff in the name of sort of Black power or whatever power, like, why can't I?
Yep.
And that is deeply troubling, of course, to me, because I know where this can go. But I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that people sort of defaulting to this again. The default mode of the human species is tribalism. Not magnanimity, not kind of liberality and magnanimity.
Yeah, and I was trying to think. This has been on my mind heavily for the past few days. I was trying to think what the world must look like from the point of view of someone like Thomas Achord, white guy with kids living in the Baton Rouge area. And look, Baton Rouge city, I've lived in the past few years, grew up in the vicinity. It is a city that is 52% Black. It is also one of the most violent cities in America in terms of murders. The violence is almost entirely within the Black community. And the Black community there has so many problems. It's not just poverty. It's the total collapse of the family. It's drugs. It's, you name it.
See, yeah. And I would add to this, Rod, and this might be one of those things that, the audience is probably not familiar with, but the corruption, the political corruption within these sort of, again, it's sort of the democratic machine politics of Baton Rouge is really awful. And they have been successful in preying upon the backs of their impoverished, brothers and sisters, right, in the Black community. And so that it's a dynamic that I think is almost impossible to explain to an outsider.
It is. Well, and if you look at it from an Achord point of view, trying to put myself in his place, you see a city and a local culture in which you cannot speak about Black dysfunction. You can't speak about the violence in the Black community. You can't speak about the out-of-wedlock birth rate and gang violence and on and on and on. Because if you speak of it, you're called a racist, you're called blaming the victim, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So the inability to confront in an honest and realistic way what's actually happening with the Black community and the relationship between whites and Blacks, only one narrative is permitted to talk about: white guilt over segregation.
Right.
We should talk about that.
Right.
But but if you suppress any realistic discussion about actual problems, then the anchor of white people, some white people, is going to come out in this evil way. And I'm sure some people listen to this podcast might say, "Oh, there he goes again," trying to make an. I'm not. I'm just saying that this comes from somewhere, and one of the sources of it is the way that our public culture, dominated by the left, has made it impossible to have an honest discussion. I remember when I was in Dallas 15 years ago, there was a well-meaning do-gooder initiative to bring people, Black folks, white folks, Hispanics together around the dinner table to talk about race and how we, and there is zero chance that any white person who wasn't already super liberal was going to participate in that, because if they objected to anything that was said, even in an honest way, like, this is what I see, let's talk about it, they would be branded a racist. And so you stay away from it. You don't talk about it. And some people, maybe Achord, allows, they allow the, evil thoughts they have within themselves to fester, and it doesn't get challenged. And he dumped all this stuff out online, behind a pseudonym,
the anonymity of the sock puppet account. Yeah.
And it's just, I don't see this getting any better, because
I despair over it as well. You talk about the need for a conversation, and that sort of takes me to this other place that I've been thinking a lot about lately, which is the absolute freak out of the sort of the priestly class of the cathedral, so to speak, right? The blob.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the narrative formers, right? The people in the news and the people in academia,
people controlling the narrative,
the people who control the narrative, the normal stuff, and that they have turned, they have pivoted temporarily, from Orange Man bad to Rocket Man bad, and Rocket Man, of course, being Elon Musk, and what he seems, and again, I can't quite. I don't have any special information. I'm just sort of watching like the rest of everybody. But what he seems to be trying to do, and what if you read his tweets, he seems to be seeing, is that the narrative, the official narrative, has been actively policed and actively curated by the powers that be, right? And of course, the obvious example of this is the Hunter Biden laptop that we've talked about in previous podcasts. And so he has said on a couple of occasions, like, my gosh, people are going to be shocked at the kind of awful things that have been going on behind the scenes here at, Twitter Inc. And people are freaking out. And it reminds me, again, I do this, but it reminds me, they'll say that they want to have a conversation about X, Y, or Z. I mean, people have been saying for our entire lifetimes, it's time for America to have a conversation about, X, right? And yet they don't seem to want to actually have a conversation about X, right?
No, it's like what you and I have talked about in the churches. The liberals say we have to have dialogue. And what they mean is, we monologue, we sit there and tell you why you're wrong, and it's so freaking dishonest. And as angry as I am at Thomas Achord for his racism and for what he has brought onto that school, I'm also angry at the broader culture for the complete dishonesty and the hypocrisy of the way we talk about race. And that's why I think it's going to get worse, because people, if you're a young, let me put it like this. I was having, after church on Sunday, I invited an American expat to go to church with me. And we were talking. He's a younger millennial, I think. And grew up in suburbia out west. And we were just talking about how people become get involved in racism, white nationalism, things like that. And he said, listen, if you grow up in, like he grew up in, I think, California, or maybe it was Washington State, Oregon, one of the liberal states. He said,
Sure.
if you grow up in, as I did, you're told constantly that if you're a male, you're a bad guy. If you're white, you're a really bad guy. He said,
Mhm.
it is relentless. And he said, I can see why people fall into that, into radicalism. Because if you're told constantly that you're worthless, when you run into somebody who says, you're not bad, they're the bad ones. And then they fill you
Sure.
with all this race hatred or hatred against the Jews or hatred against whoever. That stuff can be narcotic to somebody who has nothing else.
And you know what it does too? I've noticed this again with young people who've been sort of browbeaten with these kind of, DEI seminars and these kind of, I would call them struggle sessions. But but I guess the people who put these on would be like, trying to create, whatever, achieve social justice. And they're what happens is that that you can't say what you really think. And again, I'm not saying like, oh, I really think that all black people are horrible, or I don't mean it that way. But like, in other words, if you don't parrot the party line, you know that it'll put you in trouble. And frankly, it's just like not worth it. Right. And this happens with sort of race issues. It can happen with sex issues. It can happen with sort of gender ideology. It can happen with a bunch of different things. Right. And so, so what happens is that you have to kind of make a choice. Like, I don't, so you imagine you're like a dude, you're sitting at one of these seminars and you have to like share something. You're like, well, I don't really believe in any of this stuff. But if I say that I don't believe in any of this stuff, then it's going to create a world of problem for
Oh,
me. So
yeah.
you know what?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just going to lie, right? I'm just going to lie. Now, I get that as a strategy. I do understand that as a strategy, not because you're trying to cloak your like secret hardcore racism, but you're simply trying to not get in trouble with
Yeah.
whatever woke up apparatchik is sort of running the seminar. And so, so I get it as a strategy, but what I worry about, and this is something that I know that is near and dear to your heart, what I worry about though is this sort of, you start to get into the habit of lying.
Yep.
And getting into the habit of lying. And I think we as a culture have kind of gotten into this habit of lying to kind of get along and to kind of get along.
Sure. Sure.
And that is deeply, deeply corrosive, not only to the community, not only to sort of the group of people that are trying to figure out a way to kind of get along, but it's deeply corrosive to the human spirit, I feel.
Well, yeah, and what you're talking about is what the Polish intellectual Czesław Miłosz called Ketman. I write about this in Live Not by Lies, and it's something that Miłosz talks about in his 1953 book called The Captive Mind.
That's right.
When Miłosz came to the West, defected from the communist world, he wrote this book to try to explain to Westerners how it was that Polish intellectuals surrendered to communism, or by surrender meaning came to become pro-communist. And one of the things he talked about was living in a totalitarian society when you could be fired or even jailed for not believing in the party line. You practice something called Ketman. It's a Persian word referring to how people had to behave around, not the emperor, whatever the ruler. You put on a false face. You do just what you said. You lie, and it's a strategy of coping. The problem with that, says Miłosz, is you do it so much you become the false face.
Right.
And nobody is fooled.
Yeah, and so think about that. I mean, I actually think that this notion of Ketman is radically true, right? That it is sort of scaled out in a variety of different arenas. Think about all the times in which you don't say the truth. And I'm reminded, of course, of Peterson. Peterson talks about this a lot. One of his rules is, live not by lies, or at least don't lie. How does this affect our politics? I mean, how does this affect our religious faith communities? How does this affect our school communities? How does this affect our work environments in which the truth is simply not welcome.
Uh,
It's a profound thing, isn't it, Rod?
yeah. Did you hear about Robin Keller? The,
No.
Yeah, I just heard about it today. She is a lawyer, a senior lawyer at a big firm, I think in DC. She wrote something in the Wall Street Journal about what happened to her. 44 years of experience. She, after the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade, the law firm decided to have a big Zoom call for all of their female associates to talk about how they felt about it. Well, Robin Keller, she weighed in and said, you know what? I support this decision. I think Roe was a bad decision on legal terms, but also I think abortion is bad. And she said,
the double whammy.
yeah,
Oh
yeah,
no.
yeah.
Yeah.
And she said, think about all the unborn Black children who are disproportionately killed in abortion. Some have called it genocide. It's a terrible thing. Next thing she knows, she's called a racist by her firm and fired.
Wow.
Fired for giving an opinion at a law firm about a Supreme Court decision.
So
Go ahead.
yeah, so this is interesting to me, right? So she had the temerity to say the truth as she understood it, right?
Yeah.
And we can make the necessary throat clearings of like, your apprehension of the truth could be limited, blah 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 blah, right? But the game, of course, seems, on the one hand, it seems to be like, hey, like this is a sharing session. We're gonna talk about it out loud and sort of process out loud. Okay, but clearly the bosses, right, the people in charge of running this sharing session were lying.
Of course.
Right? They didn't want her actually to tell the truth as she appreciated it. They wanted a kind of liturgical, participatory, group amen, which is, it's pretty disgusting, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
What is that? What is that liturgy then?
Oh, you have, all of us here, you're all women. There is one opinion that you can have as a woman, and that is that abortion is sacrosanct. And there were people, according to her account in the Wall Street Journal, people said they felt unsafe with her. They couldn't breathe. I mean, it's a classic thing. I wrote on my blog about Caleb Stegall, a friend of mine who's a Kansas State Supreme Court justice, very conservative, but beyond that, he's deeply devoted to the structures of classical liberalism. And but he wrote a letter to Kansas University of Kansas Law School. He's a graduate of that, resigning his post as a teacher of law classes there. And he did this because the Federalist Society, the conservative law group, the chapter of the Federalist Society, brought in a speaker from the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is a Christian organization that defends religious liberty cases. They're very prominent. They wanted this ADF speaker to come in. The school wouldn't let him do it, as I recall. They because some said they felt unsafe. They couldn't. They feared for their physical safety. Law students did because of this hate group. And Caleb pointed out, he said, I can't participate in this. You are all betraying the fundamental principles of our profession. And of course, he's right. But see, this is the world that we have created and are creating, where everybody, if you're going to participate in society, you can't say what you really think. And this drives people like Thomas Achord into the shadows online, where he can't have his opinions challenged, because to say what you really think, you would have gotten fired. But maybe, sure, he was so radical that he. But
maybe I guess what I want to jump in here, Rod. I guess that maybe like a good faith conversation would dispel a lot of the darkness before it has a chance to take hold. I feel sort of in a weird spot here, but a conversation is good, right? I mean, being able to hash these things out is good. And so often, I mean, how many times, Rod, have you're walking around, you're going about your day, and this great idea pops into your head, and look, you're a writer, right? And so, you flip open the laptop and you start going to town and you start writing, you're like, I mean, actually, maybe this idea is pretty crap, right? I think that probably happens a good bit, or at least it's a kernel of an idea and you kind of work your way through it. But you're
I
in
never have
essence, you're
crap
having,
ideas, Kale. What are
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
talking about?
Yeah. So you are in essence sort of having a conversation with yourself, right? And you're working it out
Right.
through the keys. Well, most people are not writers. Most people actually have conversations. And I can't tell you how many times, and I'm a pretty verbal person, and I can't tell you how many times, I have what I thought as soon as I say it out loud sounds really dumb, right? But it's really helpful because it's helping me come to terms with holes in my thinking or blind spots in my thinking, and being able to say them out loud is a way that I'm kind of sharpening myself and focusing myself and getting what I hope is closer to the truth. But if you from the get-go are not able to have that kind of conversation because certain things are just not allowed to talk about, again, and I'm not talking about like, you get the sense of what I'm saying.
Of course.
Then you're never going to, as a group, be able to orient yourselves towards something that is meaningful and healthy and whole. You just aren't going to be able to do
I
it.
would never go to a dinner party where there were liberals present. It's not because I don't like liberal people. I want to be around people who challenge my thinking and all that. But the left today has become so radicalized that I would be afraid, I would be on pins and needles the whole time, afraid that something I said would be misconstrued. And then they would be on Twitter saying,
guess what Rod Dreher said.
Yeah. And it's just not worth it. It's not worth the risk. Well, what does that do to a society? Let's leave our own country for a while. I just came back before we're talking from a dinner where I work at the Danube Institute. They had a think tank here in Budapest. They had a defense conference today and geopolitical conference today. And there were some people from all over Europe and some from America who were here for the conference. I found myself talking to Václav Klaus. He's was once the president of Czechoslovakia or the Czech Republic. He oversaw the Velvet Divorce. But we were talking with him, and there was a Hungarian woman there who had been a diplomat. We were talking about the Ukraine war. And I said to them, yeah, I just got back from Slovakia, and they told me there that there are friendships, long-standing friendships that are breaking up over the Ukraine war situation. The minority of people who question NATO's strategy with Ukraine are being exiled to the margins for questioning the war. And Klaus said, yeah, that's happening in Czech Republic too. We're having friendships breaking up everywhere. The Hungarian woman said, yeah, that's happening here too. And it's even families are breaking up over this. So it's a terrible thing, but this is a matter of war. And if we can't talk, if you are not allowed to dissent from the pro-war sentiment of the ruling class in your country or pro-war sentiment at all, my God, I told these people, I said, this whole situation reminds me exactly of the space between 9/11 and the start of the Iraq War. I was so angry about that. And I've been over this a million times. I was so angry about the war that I didn't want to hear anybody saying that we shouldn't go to war. Pat Buchanan became anathema on the right because he criticized the war before. It said it's not a good idea. I just didn't want to hear it. And so because people like me on the right did not want to hear it, we allowed ourselves to get into a war that became a total disaster. This is what happens when you are so certain of your rightness that you can't hear anything else, and somebody who dissents from you is immoral and should be driven from your company. You go into disaster.
So what do you think is going to play out then? Like if you sort of scale this out the next, what's going to happen? Honestly?
You mean with Ukraine?
All this stuff.
I'm really, really worried about it. I was just before you and I came on. I texted a friend of mine back in the U.S., a Czech immigrant, and told him about this. And he said, mark my words, there's going to be a much wider war. He said, that's the spirit of the time. People are surrendering to hatred.
Well, and Rod, you've been warning about this for the last couple of months, really, since you sort of landed back in Budapest. But that we don't know what it's like not to have heat. We don't know what it's like not to have cheap energy. We don't know what it's like not to have plentiful food. And I mean, we sort of largely speaking in the so-called first world. I would imagine people are going to lose their minds, lose their groundedness if they're hungry, if they're cold, if they're angry.
Yeah.
Like I guess I'm a little worried.
Yeah, you should be. You should be.
About those sort of, because those have a way of kind of enhancing predispositions toward conflict or settling scores or whatnot.
There was a woman at the table tonight who works in the charity world, and she just got back from Ukraine. And she said that what she saw was just total desperation. So ordinary people just want the war to end. They just want it to end. All of them, of course, hate Russia. They're patriots, but they're exhausted. There's no power. They struggle for food, et cetera, et cetera. But nobody in power in Russia, in Ukraine, in the United States, in the capitals of Europe, save for Viktor Orban here in Hungary, wants peace or wants to have peace negotiations. And it's really scary because these people, these poor Ukrainians, are pawns. America.
It really does seem that way.
The United States is going to fight to the last Ukrainian, fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. It's so sad and it's infuriating. But again, it goes, we get right back to the question of there are narratives that you're not allowed to question in public. And
why? Okay, so we've been sort of pointing out that we can't have this conversation, right? That because these narratives are so sort of powerful and they're clearly being curated and protected, right? What allows you to break out of certain sort of ruts or stuck non-discourse discourse? And what are the kind of things would allow you to sort of see and talk about something in a fresh way?
Gosh, I don't know, because you remember, Kale, that long after it was obvious that the Iraq War was a disaster and was a terrible thing for the United States, the Republican Party kept at it. It was only Donald Trump that changed the narrative on that. Only Donald Trump.
It's true. It's true. It's true.
I remember where I was the night that he did that. It was the day that Antonin Scalia died, Justice Scalia. I was in Virginia. I'd spent the day with Ken Myers, the great Christian he was a podcaster before we had podcasts. I was back in my hotel watching the South Carolina Republican debate, and Donald Trump stood on the stage and denounced the Iraq War. He said it was bad. He got booed for that by the South Carolina audience. But Trump was right. But Trump made it safe then for Republicans and conservatives who had doubts about the war to say it. But Kale, this was January 2016. We went to war in 2003. So I bring that up to say that I don't know if there is anything that.
Well, I guess right, and I remember all that too, and I think you're right. But it seems like we don't even have we haven't exercised this muscle in so long. This ability to get some kind of perspective on things, some kind of perspective in which we can render an analysis or make some sense out of something that right now seems to be completely stuck and bogged down in all the various camps, right? And everything, people have got literally got guns. It reminds me of the so-called Mexican standoff, like in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and each person has got the gun, it trained at the other person. And what do you do in these kind of situations? And I sort of feel like we're in this sort of moment, and it's not just about the Ukraine-Russian war. I feel the same way about so many of the things. The battles are real and analogously that we seem to be stuck in.
Yeah.
And the people who are in positions of power and influence just simply do not seem interested in thinking in a different way.
Yeah, because
they really don't.
Well, do you remember when we recently had the nightclub shooting at the gay club in Colorado Springs?
Yeah, right,
Nancy
right.
Pelosi barely let the blood dry before she was blaming conservatives for this. We didn't know anything about the shooter. The police hadn't said anything. She blamed conservatives. In Slovakia, where I just was a few weeks ago, this very disturbed teenager went into a gay club and shot two people. He left a manifesto. I think he killed himself too. He left a manifesto saying he intended to kill the conservative prime minister, top conservative politician.
Right.
Waited outside the guy's home. The guy never came out, so he went to a gay nightclub and shot these people. He was not a religious person at all, but he was an atheist. But what did the left in that country, Slovakia, do? They imitated the American left. They said, this is the Catholic Church's fault. Now, the Catholic Church doesn't know what to do. I mean, it's going to stand, from what I'm told by the Catholics there, it's going to stand by it wants to stand by its teaching about homosexuality, but it's getting clobbered by people who say, you did this, even though they had nothing to do with it.
Right.
And I think, and there's a point here. I think that I was talking with a friend about why so many young Christians, like particularly Protestants, engaged young male Protestants, are drawn to people like Douglas Wilson.
Right. Sorry.
Go
ahead.
Douglas Wilson, the pugilistic pastor, hyper Calvinist.
I know who he is. Yeah, I know who he is.
In Moscow, Idaho. Why are they drawn to him? Because, Douglas Wilson just loves combat. He's a really smart guy, and often he's right about things.
Well, that's exactly right. People are drawn to it because it's, frankly, you're sort of tired of the narrative that you're being force-fed over and over and over again, and you have to sit around and pretend like it's true.
Exactly.
And they're sitting there thinking like, well, like, I don't know what this Douglas Wilson guy is, but good Lord, at least he's saying something different, because you're telling me to lean in and you're telling me to do this and everything's this, that. And it's like, it's all crap.
Yeah.
And like, the kids know this, and I think they see through it. A lot of them at least see through it. And so then they cast about looking for something different.
Right. And I think that from what I understand about the evangelical world, from my evangelical friends, they just get sick and tired of the soft, bougie, warm and fuzzy winsomeness, because they see what's happening to Christians everywhere and what the left is doing. And if the good people, quote unquote, the good people, the responsible people, won't fight back, then they'll naturally gravitate to people like Douglas Wilson, or even darker. Yeah.
Right. I was just going to say, right. So that's why I think it's important for adults, people like me and you and other people who sort of, talk about these sorts of things, provide some avenue for people to sort of hear other perspectives. It's important because it can go dark and it can go bad, real quick. I want to bring up something. It's something that was hugely influential in my own life and my own thinking, and helped me break out of certain ruts. I remember when I was, in high school, I was very much motivated by social justice. I was very much motivated by what I thought and still believe is the soaring vision of Martin Luther King and all of that. And I remember reading at the time, I don't know if you remember this, Spike Lee had come out with that movie, Do the Right Thing. Mm-hmm. And he was really popular. And right after that, he started, he made this black cap with a silver gray X on the front of the cap. And it was a Malcolm X cap. And I remember like, well, what is this? I didn't know what it was. So I picked up, because this is the kind of kid I was, I picked up the autobiography of Malcolm X, and it's a great read. It's a great book, and it's really challenging. It's very challenging, and in it, basically, it's the story of Malcolm X's, moving from a kind of thug life, as a young child, going through all the sort of the bad stuff, and then becoming a radical Nation of Islam preacher, and then toward the end of his life, he sort of moderates it and becomes a kind of more expansive international Muslim,
because he went to Mecca and saw
right.
people of all different backgrounds,
Right.
all
Right.
worshiping together.
But what was so interesting to me about reading that book is that he was saying he was rendering critiques of kind of what you and I would call sort of LBJ Great Society type thinking. I know it's a little bit off in terms of the dates, but he was rendering a critique of the welfare system as a way of infantilizing vulnerable communities and making things, so that the cure was actually making things worse for the people who are hurting. And so for me, it really opened up a whole space of sort of rethinking and reorienting something. And, you look at something like Malcolm X, who went to a very dark place, obviously, white devils and all that stuff that he got out of Elijah Muhammad, the progenitor of Louis Farrakhan and all that sort of stuff. And then his humanity kind of emerges through that in almost a kind of miraculous way before he gets murdered. But that's why I think it's important, that you can step back from these dark places.
Yeah.
And, I understand why somebody, as reprehensible and as gross as a Thomas Achord's sort of dalliances with white supremacy are. I can understand why, that conversation that he needed to have in public migrates into the dark corners and recesses of the internet where bad things happen, right? And so if you can have these conversations in a mature way, maybe you don't become some crazy lunatic, sinful white supremacist.
Yeah.
Maybe you have a different critique, a healthier critique of things.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. But it's just, we have created a situation that is primed to radicalize young people. Yeah. I mean, we really have.
Yeah, that's where we are. That's where we are. And I think it's, I don't know. It's a little bit vexing, but it's really important that we do this, right? I mean,
let me change the topic just for a second. What do you think about the Balenciaga ads? These are the ads for the Balenciaga high fashion house. Came out with these Christmas ads that were disgusting. They were sexualizing children. They had all kinds of weird occultic darkness in there. And Balenciaga had to pull it after they were criticized. But then they tried to blame the photographer, and one of the photographers said, "Hey, I just took the pictures. I didn't style this."
Right.
Well, it turns out the chief stylist for Balenciaga is a Russian woman named Lada Volkova. And she was called by W Magazine, a big fashion magazine, the coolest stylist in the business. It emerged online before she took her Instagram private. She had some deeply perverse satanic imagery there about torture and torturing kids and sexualization of kids. And there was some flat out satanic stuff there where there's a woman, I don't know if it's her or not, lying there in front of a goat figure with the pentagram and all that. I guess what I'm asking,
and her legs are splayed out, and there's pentagrams and sexual demonic stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's all very obvious.
So I remember some of us were freaked out a couple of years ago when Lil Nas X had the gay rapper had this video where he went to hell and had sex with Lucifer. I mean, it was just absolutely shocking. But now it turns out we seem to be finding out more and more that there's all kinds of satanic stuff in high culture. What's going on?
Well, gosh, Roger, I can't believe you're dropping this bomb.
As we're finishing up,
48 minutes into our weekly session here, which is, I shouldn't call it a session. I should call it an episode, because calling it a session makes it sound like it's therapy. But
a spasm.
A spasm. Well, I mean, look, Roger, I don't think this will come as any surprise to you. Like, I believe that the devil's real, and I believe that demons are real, and I believe that they look for any opportunity at all to sort of wend their way into dark human hearts. And so I am not shocked at all that people dabble and get enmeshed in these kind of dark things. It's I think that the world is way stranger than we give it credit for. You and I live our little sort of fairly curated, middle class lives as we go about our business and we write our things and we teach our things and we talk to our friends and we do this sort of thing. But under all of that, under it or above it, sort of kind of the same type stuff is some radical evil, radical evil that exists, and it's not a joke, and it's not just posing. And I really. I'm really disgusted by the whole thing.
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of it beyond the fact that it needs to be called out early and often. It needs to be, these people need to be chased back into hell.
Yeah, they do. They do. And we don't, and I see we're running out of time. The only thing I want to say about it is, I agree with you. I believe that the devil is real. I know he's real. And if you spend any time as I have talking to exorcists or people who've had dealings with that, you don't have any doubt. I want to say this. And in Dallas the other day, I wrote about this on my blog. They found a drug house where they had been, the drug dealers were Mexicans, and they had been worshiping Santa Muerte, who was like this fake saint who was, it's like a religion, a narco religion. And there was blood on the altar from sacrificed animals, and they were cursing DEA agents and all that. This stuff is in a normal neighborhood in Dallas. It's everywhere. Here's the point I want to make. Just before the Russian Revolution, just before the French Revolution, you had two things happening. You had a radical increase in sexual perversion and a radical increase in occult activity and Satanism. Yeah. We have it now. It's everywhere. We are headed towards some violent explosion. All the stuff we've been talking about, the hatred that is coming between people, the people not being able to say what they think and being oppressed, and combined with all this other really dark and crazy stuff. I'm not going to make a prediction, but if you look at history, it doesn't look good for us right now.
Yeah, and no, it really doesn't. And I think that I appreciate, we're trying to sort of look at these patterns that seem to be emerging and repeating themselves in a kind of fractal like fashion. And you're right. I mean, and these things are hitting us. Maybe it's safe to say, Rod, that we're not at a sort of a cultural strength moment right now.
No.
So, these kind of things can be we are vulnerable. Maybe that's a way to say it.
Yeah.
And look, I'll say it since, I am who I am. I mean, I think the only response to this kind of thing is prayer. The only response to this kind of thing is cleaving close to your faith and a life of prayer and a life of devotion. And, that stuff matters. It's real. And, be a witness to people who might be falling prey to these sort of temptations.
You're right about that. But I would add this too. You've got to open your eyes, people, and see what's happening. Don't simply say, the standard thing people always say when this stuff happens, like, they said Elvis was a threat to the morals. Come on. Right. This is the sexualization of children and the ritual sexual exploitation of children under the guise of the occult. It's not even being hidden anymore. It's right out there in the open, run by our elites. You got to wake up. You got to not only pray, but take it seriously, but talk to your kids about this. Don't just brush it off.
Yeah. And as far as the sexual stuff is concerned, I mean, I think that, it's very easy to sort of draw these sort of connect the dots sort of way that, the hypersexualization of our culture will trickle down to the hypersexualization of our children. We still are living in the maelstrom of the sexual revolution. I just got finished reading Louise Perry's fantastic book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. I'd really like to get her on the podcast, and she just says bluntly, like, we have to return to some kind of binding morality because it has wreaked havoc on all of us. And what I love about the book is not only has it just wreaked havoc on women, but men too, who are caught up in these addictive patterns of pornography and sadomasochism, and all of this stuff, as she charts out and you've talked about before, comes straight out of the dungeons of San Francisco sex
Yep.
caves. Like there is a kind of a weird connection. It's always kind of on the avant-garde and, these sort of pushing of boundaries. Like, well, guess what? All those boundaries have been obliterated.
Yep.
Like, there's nothing standing in the way of any of these things. And I agree with you. I think we have to have our eyes open. We have to take this stuff very seriously.
We do.
It's not a joke.
Do you remember a few years ago, 50 Shades of Grey became this huge...
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Lurid, sadomasochistic novel. It became a huge phenomenon among middle-class women, nice women who are like, getting their jollies reading about sadomasochism. And now S&M is
totally mainstream.
Totally mainstream.
Totally mainstream.
So,
well, look, I think that, because we have dark hearts, right? I mean, I think that it's not surprising that, we are tempted in this way because we have dark hearts. And I think we have to take that, that stuff seriously too. So I guess maybe that's the theme of today. Dark hearts.
It's once again another lighthearted, cheerful hour with Rod and Kale. I'm leaving in the morning for Turkey for to go visit the sites of the 7 churches of Revelation. And
excellent.
I think that next week when we talk, I will have come back from there. And, I'm excited about it from an archaeological point of view, but also from a spiritual point of view, because those churches aren't there anymore. They were thriving churches. They're not there. And it's always, this is one of the things I love about traveling in Europe and seeing ruins is great civilizations come and go. And
that's right. And we forget that. We really forget that.
And especially we Americans, because our country is so young. But
and it's so basically protected, right? I mean, it's very easy to be on naps from history when you're, protected by 2 oceans. So
well, look, it's a lot to learn.
Well, look, great. Happy travels to you, of course. Safe travels to you, of course. And I'm looking forward to hearing your debrief when we get back.
Okay.
All right. Take care, Rod.
Bye,
Be well,
Kale.
everybody. Bye-bye.